Thank you, all of you, for coming, and it's my first opportunity to be in Russia, so I really appreciate it. I just wish I could stay longer, but I've got to go to Italy on Saturday. And this was advertised as a paper on Chinese initial public stock offerings in the US market. But after hearing the discussion today that we had, I thought maybe it would be interesting to talk a little bit about Silicon Valley and the development of Silicon Valley. So I've switched the topic, hopefully with your permission, and this will be less of an academic discussion and more of just a description of how Silicon Valley grew, the history and development, and hopefully it'll be of interest to you. If about 3 slides in you say, gosh, go back to China, I can do that. I'm very flexible and comfortable with that. Mario, perhaps since I'm in the College of Agriculture at UC Davis, and today I'm going to talk about Silicon Valley, which is of course related to Stanford and UC Berkeley. Davis, you may not know, but we are related to a place called the Napa Valley. If you like wine, I know the French disagree, but if you like wine, we are fully competitive now with the French. And the relationship with UC Davis, I have a chapter coming out in a new book on University of California departments and units and particular regional industrial clusters. It's edited with David Mowry, and we're going to take a real in-depth look at that. But anyway, if you want to remember Davis, think about good wine, particularly Cabernet Sauvignon. So when you see a Cabernet Sauvignon, you think of Mario and I, okay? And if it's a, we will be drinking at that time. We're always drinking at UC Davis. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about new organizational forms in regions and clusters, and this one's actually the venture capital presentation. Let me just do the other one. This one is, I'm writing a book on the development of the venture capital industry, and so, so this is the presentation actually I gave in Finland. The other presentation was venture capital. So I'm writing a history of the venture capital industry in the United States going back to the 1930s. It's been 12 years sort of. I have trouble focusing, so I haven't quite gotten it done. But today I'm going to talk about this. This is a presentation I gave in Finland. So part at the end might be more policy-oriented because it was given to policy people in the Finnish government. So, but let's just start with the history. Okay, this is going to outline of my talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about California today. California is really a quite interesting place, and I think you'll see why. Then I'm going to talk briefly about the Silicon Valley ecosystem, the history of Silicon Valley. This is very brief. The history, I have a 2-hour presentation on the history, which, of course, as Mario knows, as professors, we can talk and talk and talk, and then we can talk some more. And then I'm going to talk about policy issues, and I'll just leave off the Nordic nation piece of this. This was literally this presentation I decided on 15 minutes ago, so I'm using a presentation slightly different than what I expected to. Okay, let's think about California. California, if you use Shanghai Jiaotong ratings of academic universities, California has 10 of the top 50 universities. UK is performing very well. They've got 5, right? And New York, then with Columbia, Cornell, NYU, and probably Rockefeller U has 4. So California now is, its insertion into the global economy is intellectual property creation. Works of the mind, be it Hollywood or San Diego and biotech or Silicon Valley. In terms of shares of US Patent Office patents, what you can see here, so I don't have a pointer, this is non-US patents going up. This is US patents minus California, Texas, New York, and Massachusetts, which is actually shrinking as a percentage of all USPTO patents, and this is California. California now is the intellectual center in terms of patents for the United States. Massachusetts actually, on a per capita basis, performs better than California, but the sheer size of California in terms of intellectual property is becoming dominant. The only country in the world that patents more than California is Japan. So, Germany is not competitive with California in patenting. This is venture capital disbursements. This is venture capital investment by, let's see, that's by year. Red is Northern California. Green is Southern California. Blue is probably New York, and yellow is Massachusetts. So any of you know venture capital invests in the highest tech firms that they hope will build, the Googles, Yahoos, Intels, et cetera, of the future. So what you can see is the dominance of Northern California in this particular activity. So you see universities, you see patents, and you see venture capital. This is employment in the Bay Area. This is through 2001. This is components. Components is yellow. Think semiconductor chips. Blue is computer and peripherals, basically disappearing. And this is software through 2001, and internet just goes straight off the chart. So Silicon Valley has evolved from being a components and computers and peripherals, think Apple computer if you want, to basically a software hub, pretty clearly. And of course, internet beyond that. But I haven't got the data, but it just goes like that, really. So you can see also that the valley has changed what it does through time. I think that's really interesting when one thinks about a cluster and how it evolves, that it changes what it does through time. And that's clearly the case here in Silicon Valley. Okay, that was very ugly and hard to see. I'm sorry. What this is initial public stock offerings. I've built a database of initial public stock offerings from 1996 to 2010, actually. This is what I'm reporting here. I actually have it through 1990. It's 2,000 firms. I have 40,000 people in my database, each person who is involved in the IPO. But what I want to show you here is, why is it not doing anything? It's not moving forward. Somebody tell me why it's not moving forward? Okay, no, guess we'll do it this way. Okay, so let's see, sorry about that. This is okay. There it is, okay. So of the initial public stock offerings in the United States are the most successful firms. Then they offer their stock to the public. That's what makes Sergey Brin a billionaire. That's what makes Mark Zuckerberg a billionaire, is when they take the company that they've built and then they sell it to the public. Okay, so what I want to show here is that California has 35% of all US IPOs come from California. California is about 18% of the US population. So it sort of gives you an idea. But when we look at venture capital financed, right, which tend to be the highest tech firms, it's 46% are coming out of Northern California. Actually, this is Silicon Valley, the San Francisco Bay Area, including San Francisco and including Berkeley on the other side of the bay. The city of Sunnyvale is a small city down on the peninsula in the heart of Silicon Valley, is about 70,000 people, has 4.8% of all venture capital financed IPOs. So the core of Silicon Valley is where these firms are coming from. You can see here Massachusetts, 10.9%, and then San Diego is in here. Oops, San Diego County is right there. Sunnyvale and San Diego County have about the same number of IPOs. IPOs is sort of the success story for new firms. Okay. So when we think about the United States in high tech, and I don't know how the US is perceived in Russia from high tech, but in terms of high tech, but certainly I spend more time in Finland, they perceive the US as a leader in that area. The Bay Area is important, and Boston and San Diego, and then the rest. So Silicon Valley is a very special place. When you think about the United States, or think about Silicon Valley, you shouldn't think that's the United States. The United States is lots of other things that are not high tech, but Silicon Valley is the center. So let's look at the ecosystem. What is it that makes the region go, right? That's kind of what a lot of people are interested in. And I argue that it's a dialectic, an evolution of culture, economics, technology, and social networks. So it's all of these things put together. And you have an entrepreneurial culture, we'll describe that. You have capital gains, right? So the venture capitalists, when they invest in a firm, what they would like is a firm that in 5 years will give them back 10 times the money they invested in it, right? So they put $10 in 5 years, they want to get $100 out. And Google, the Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia, for every dollar they put in, they got about $150 back in about 5 years. So that, right, is very motivational. If you're an investor, that makes you kind of motivated, right? You're motivated to invest. And the wonderful thing about an investment structure like that is I can have 10 failures, right, where I lose $1. If on one of them I get $150, right? You're very happy with that. Everybody's happy in that environment. So that's what drives the region. So that's the capital gains. I'll talk about networking and about fast-changing technologies. I mean, the core of the valley is catch the new technology. Whatever wave that is you catch it, right? We had the clean tech, right? Everybody heard of clean tech? Everybody's heard of clean tech, right? Clean tech took about, I would say Silicon Valley invested probably $1 billion in clean tech. It's a total failure. That money's all gone. But it doesn't matter as long as there's another wave. Okay, so what we have is a culture, a social structure, and economics aligned. They're aligned to build firms really fast and make them really big, right? So in Silicon Valley, let's say you start a small firm. You've got an algorithm at Stanford. You're 2 guys in Stanford's PhD program, and you've got an algorithm for search, right? You start your little firm, and immediately a venture capitalist start to invest in. Now, this is success stories, and there are lots of failures, right? By the time they had 50 employees, they'd hired Eric Schmidt, who was as CEO. Eric Schmidt had been the chief technology officer of a company called Sun Microsystems. Then he was president of a large software company called Novell. Now, those companies are now gone. But with 50 people, he was a very small firm. He's willing to join and bring top-tier management, right? I mean, he's top quality manager. So you have all of these pieces in the ecosystem that come together around success. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So if you think about an ecosystem, this is sort of, I just put this together. There's somebody, when I presented it, they said, oh no, you should have another one. Anyway, this whole ecosystem is developed to support small firms that have the potential to grow to be large firms very fast, right? And you have venture capitalists, you have law firms, you have specialized accounting. Accountants that are specialized in doing the accounting for a firm that's going to grow extremely rapidly, right? You have investment bankers, you have executive search. You have people who will go out and find you a top quality manager when you've only got 50 or 100 employees. They're going to get you a manager who before was used to managing 1,000 or 3,000 employees, because the plan is to grow the firm that fast. You've got to grow the firm fast. Board of directors, banks, I love these, bankruptcy specialists. There's specialists there that are undertakers. When the firm dies, they come in, They look at the patent portfolio. Who can we sell the patents for? They look at the desks. Who can we sell these desks to for the next startup, right? They're the undertakers for the system. Because in this system, there's lots of death. 80% of the firms fail. Money's gone, everything's gone, there's not much left. Bring in the undertakers, clean up that mess, and go forward to the next one. So this is a system full of failure. Failure is just the natural part of this ecosystem, and massive amounts of failure. But again, it doesn't matter. More money will come in because as long as there's a Google or a Yahoo or an Intel or a 3Com or a Synoptics or a Cisco or an Oracle in that ecosystem, the death is kind of trivial and irrelevant. Okay, so what kind of opportunities do you look for? The technology and the opportunities, right? Doesn't have to be the highest tech in the world. It's the opportunity to grow a firm as quickly as possible. Sometimes it's the highest tech in the world, but sometimes it's Facebook, which in its initial stages was not really high tech. So, has to be an industry that's not too expensive to enter, right? You come in and you say, I want to build new locomotives for pulling trains. The Valley says, we can't afford that, forget it. That's not our business, right? So it's got to be not too expensive to enter, and where the incumbents can't understand or react to your model, right? So what you want is a sector that has a large opportunity where the people that are close by that are really big can't enter that marketplace, right? And software is obviously one we think of. Redefine markets or captures the next step in an evolving market, right? I mean, Facebook is just a next step in the evolving market, as is, Instagram. Facebook bought Instagram for $1 billion, right? Because Instagram was the next level. And Facebook is going, oh my gosh, if Instagram succeeds, we're out, right? So they just went in and bought the company for $1 billion. I don't know how old it was, but it wasn't. YouTube is one of my favorite examples, right? Google goes in and buys YouTube because they can see that dumping data over the net, dumping video over the net is the next step. So they paid $1.5 billion for YouTube. It was 18 months old, and it had about 25 million in investment. Well, you can see the capital gains. But it was because Google is looking and goes, shit, Facebook is going to start to cut us out. Let's just buy them. So it's the next redefining a market, capture the next step in an evolving market. And the internet has had evolution after evolution, right? Yahoo, Google, right? Facebook, Instagram, Facebook, perhaps Pinterest. It's a little hard to say where that's going. 10x improvement or change the way things are done. I know that Google is not so big. I don't think that's so big in Russia, is it, Google? Is it big? Yeah, it is. It's not.
Well, it's not the dominant player, but it's going to other markets.
Okay. So in the United States, or in Europe, Western Europe, I spend most of my time in Western Europe, I apologize. Well, move on quickly here when you step in it. Google it, right? I mean, people say Google it. We'll Google it. I don't know if they say that. Okay. So that's the kind of dominance you're looking for. Google it, or today we're talking, well, let's use Facebook for this. Let's use LinkedIn for that. Well, let's use Silicon Valley firm. Let's use Silicon Valley firm. Twitter. Okay, Silicon Valley firm. So that's the kind of things that you're looking for. But you have to gamble to get there, and that's what the VCs do. PC, internet, local area networks, smartphone, create new platforms or standards. I mean, Cisco wins in the network game because it takes TCP/IP. It was a government standard, but they grabbed it first and went with TCP/IP. Okay, local area networks, Ethernet, right? 3Com. That's a valley, right? So both de facto and de jure standards, look for the standards, either create it or look for it, or create whole new platforms. And always cannibalize the old technology, right? You're cannibalizing. The venture capitalists, they fund him and he's successful, and then they look around, who can cannibalize him? Let's fund them. The same venture capitalist, right? Once you've cashed out with an IPO, you were our friend, but we're gone. but now she's our friend if she can cannibalize your great business, right? So it's a cannibalization process. And the technology's constantly allowing you to cannibalize. And that's why the IT sector has been so central to the development of the venture capital industry and in Silicon Valley. Okay, so the culture. What is the new thing? What's the new thing? Which one's next? Right? Whatever it is, that's what we want. We want to find out what's new. Right? So it's all about the new thing. Go for it, change the world, right? Tell that smart engineer who's got this idea, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, hey, go for it, change the world, right? I'm going to make a lot of money on you, right? You better change the world in a way that makes money. We're not interested. If it's not going to make us capital gains, we're not interested. And gadget and engineering, open networks. Everyone knows someone, right? So a hotshot programmer from, let's say, one of your best schools goes to Stanford, gets his or her PhD. By then, they start to know people. And you start to know people, and that's how you get money. That's how you get partners, and you put a team together. Performance-based trust, right? If you perform for me, you're my friend. If you don't perform for me, I've got no use for you, right? Very quickly, right? They give you projects, you perform well, and people say, oh my God, she's a hot shot, okay? Mostly he, but he's a hot shot. I trust her. She can deliver. Now, if she doesn't deliver, you're gone, right? No need for you. You can't deliver. You're not necessary, right? And you can't be part of the game. And of course, fast-paced environment, high turnover. People are moving constantly, looking for the new thing. What's the next hot firm, right? And if you're a hot firm like Facebook, you can pick up the best programmers. Maybe you can't get them out of Google, but you could certainly pull them out of Oracle or some other company, right? And the other thing about this environment is it's developed so many hotshot programmers, hotshot engineers of all kinds, and sucked them in from all over the world. You can find the Russians, you can find the Chinese, you can find the Indians, you can find the Germans, you can find the Italians, whole set of Italian entrepreneurs. We think of Italy as a non-entrepreneurial country, and there's a whole pile of Italians in the valley, and they know each other, right? And they network. And they move, right? And so there's one Italian's over in a hotshot new startup, and he says, contacts his friends, who he knows are top programmers. He says, come on over here. This is the new place. This is the new thing. So the network and the high turnover. So capital gains drive the entire system, right? It's all about the new thing that becomes worth lots and lots of money, right? That's what drives everybody in the system, right? Is the capital gains. The whole system is driven that way. Okay, so the history. I'm going to be very brief here. So if you've read anything about Silicon Valley, there's all sorts of explanations, right? And I'm not going to take any particular position, though Mario will hate me. I'm kind of a technological determinist on this. I think it's the technology, but I know it's socially constructed, et cetera, et cetera. But universities, Stanford, Berkeley, right? In the biotech place, University of California, San Francisco, top global class universities. They're bringing in smart people from all over the world. They're graduating and they're entering the ecosystem. Having capital, right? It's very hard in other parts of the world to find the kind of venture capital that you have in Silicon Valley. So you've got capital, right? Labor, ideas, and capital. Defense Department. The U.S. Defense Department has spent enormous amounts of money, particularly in the early days of the Valley, buying the products. Right, when we were in the space race with the Russians, right? Well, we were, right after Sputnik. Sputnik was very important for Silicon Valley. So we need to thank you guys for helping us, because you scared the Americans big time, and they started to invest enormous money into rockets, right? into the military. But what did the military need? It needed chips that were very light. Because it costs a lot of money to send things up, right? So you need little things, little IT things. So that helped drive it. Our federal government started buying because of the space race with the Russians. So this was very, very important. I've never given this in Russia, so I never thanked you, but I'm going to thank you right now because it was super important. The culture, right? Some people give it as a cultural explanation. I would argue that the culture emerged with the technology and with the business structure. And then social capital from networking. A lot of people have talked about how there's such great networks, which I think is true, but it doesn't explain the whole thing. So it's probably a coevolution of individuals, right? Steve Jobs, of course, was born in Silicon Valley, but bringing Larry Ellison of Oracle, Sergey Brin, whose family came to Maryland, then he went to Stanford, right? He came into the ecosystem. So it's bringing these individuals into this ecosystem. So it's the individuals, and the individuals learning how the business culture there works. Obviously, the firms are important, organizations and institutions, right? Organizations like Stanford, various institutions, the universities. So all of these have evolved together to create an ecosystem that's quite logical and interactive. And for other places that want to develop a Silicon Valley, it's hard because you can't just do one thing, just money, or just create great universities. That's not enough. It's that these things came together and evolved historically and became more and more interlinked and networked. So I'm not going to bother you with this, but Fairchild Semiconductors, which was absolutely driven by the Sputnik era, by the need to compete with the Russians on the military side, in the space, actually in rocketry. Fairchild Semiconductor, I won't describe it in great detail, but Fairchild Semiconductor was started by eight great engineers, two of which, Gordon Moore and Bob Noyce, started Intel later. And if you look at the whole semiconductors, what put silicon into Silicon Valley, right? It was Fairchild and everybody who spun off of Fairchild and created new firms. So we have Fair Children. I've got a map. I didn't bring it with me. Fair Children, Fair Grandchildren, Fair Great-Grandchildren, right? So Fairchild spins off. There's a company here. Somebody else spins off, and there's another company. Somebody else spins off, and yet another company. And you can trace the genealogy, large parts of the genealogy, to Fairchild. And the semiconductor, which was improving so quickly, a la Gordon Moore's law, right, underneath was driving this whole technology, because as digitization becomes more and more powerful, you can do more things. You can compute, right? Your iPhone is, of course, a small computer that's more powerful than a computer 20 years ago in its computational capability, right? So this technology is driving it. Computers, right? Today, there are no computers made in Silicon Valley. It's too labor intensive. There's no interest in that, no money in it anymore. Networking, 3Com, Cisco, and the ability to dump data down a fiber optics channel over a wire, right? That helps that drives the internet, right? And it's that constant improvement, right? Google's looking around, and all of a sudden you can start to pump video down the pipeline to the home. YouTube, right? Software, Oracle, Adobe, and then you know all of these, Yahoo, PayPal, eBay. And of course, right, this new smartphone, which basically what's happened is, and I've got a paper on this, Apple and Google basically killed Nokia. I spend my time in Finland, and the Finns are very sad, but it was basically the Valley killed Nokia. Nokia's dead, right? There's just pieces of it left to crummy companies like Microsoft buying up stuff. That's a Valley joke, right? Microsoft is in Washington, not in Silicon Valley. So anyway, in joke, forget it. Now getting old, you have older firms like Facebook and Twitter, kind of the past, right? LinkedIn, these are the past companies. Right? And then what's next, right? Maybe it's Pinterest, maybe it's the cloud computing. It's hard to say what the next thing is. I think social media still got a way to go, but deals. But clearly, people are thinking about cloud. Is cloud the next space? So the Valley's looking at the old stuff and saying, that's the past. Can we get another generation of social media on that? And is there another technology that's going to come along and offer these great new opportunities? Right now, the buzz is, right, it's cloud, it's mobile, and it's social media 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. It's hard to say, when the social media thing dies and there's no more in that. But anyway, look for the new thing. This stuff is old, an old company there, right? Ancient historical company, Google. Okay, I just wanted to just put this in. There's another piece, which is the biotech piece. In the United States, there's sort of 3 concentrations of biotechnology companies, really elite concentrations. The Bay Area is probably number 1, and Boston and San Diego are number 2, and then it kind of trails off from there. This, again, is basically Genentech and Cetus were the 2 earliest ones. And some venture capitalists at Kleiner Perkins, Tom Perkins, started to hear about molecular biology, and he said, well, let's see, there might be something there, and he invested a couple million to see where it went. And it became something that's a rather big industry. It's clearly secondary in importance to the IT. And then, you have Tesla Motors. I mean, will it succeed? Who knows? Not a lot of money into it, probably 100 million or so. So anyway, they're looking at clean tech. Well, maybe there's an opportunity there. So whatever technology's there, you take a few risks and invest. Somebody will invest to see if something happens. Nothing happens, it's dropped. And that's the end of it, and we move on. Okay, so just briefly, Silicon Valley leaders. The world's leading device maker today is Apple. That's kind of like a surprise, right? It used to be, you guys are young, so you don't remember a company called Sony. But, right? That's kind of past right now, right? Apple just ate them. World's leading, I don't know what it is, it's not search. Basically, the world's leading data company, Google. I mean, Google's not a search company. Google's a data company. I mean, that's what they have. It's data. Google Scholar, Google Map, Google this, Google that. It's data. It's all about data. So Google's the leading, actually, data company in the world. Leading social media site, probably Facebook. Leading chip maker in the world, Intel. Leading networking equipment, though Huawei is competing now. Cisco, world's 2nd largest software company after Microsoft, Oracle. Right? So over these periods, and these are the winners out of hundreds, even thousands of firms that have fallen by the wayside. Right? In this, really, it's a jungle. So let's see, policy issues. So let's just talk about those briefly. This is a little bit more of a government policymakers that I do a lot of presentations for. Okay, I mentioned this. Early days, massive DoD funding. Again, the Sputnik days. Early days, difficult to enforce patent laws. Right? Mario's written about patents. Well, one of the issues was in the early days, patent law in the Valley was quite loose, and it's tightened up. And that's become actually a debate that Mario and some of the people at the law school are actually actively involved in. Standard setting, right? IT standards, the setting of IT standards. The Valley has been very important to that. R&D expenditures. The U.S. government, the U.S. military, right, has spent enormous amounts of money on university research. Right? Sergey Brin, Larry Page were supported by the Department of Defense as graduate students at Stanford. So were Jerry Yang and, I'm blocking Jerry Yang and whoever the David Filo. They were Stanford grads. They were supported by Defense Department funding. So many of these firms, the students, the people who started these firms, were supported by U.S. Defense Department research funding in the top universities, Berkeley, Stanford, and obviously on the East Coast, MIT, Caltech, right? So that's a really important part of this story. Immigration. U.S. universities, right? Do you know any Russian friends of yours who've gone to U.S. universities? Right, on scholarships, right? So, yeah, okay, so there's perfect. What a brilliant immigration strategy. Find the smartest Russian, Chinese, Indian, German, just you can substitute anything in there. Person from Mars, from the moon, it doesn't matter. Come on over to the United States. We'll give you 4-year scholarship. And then when you graduate, a company will pick you up almost for sure. So probably your friends went to Stanford or MIT, and then did they come back to Russia? No. What'd they do? Working in Google, right? But that's just the Russians. I give the same presentation in Denmark, not as many because Russia's a bigger country, and it's the same thing. Yeah, I was Dane, but Google hired me, right? This is brilliant immigration strategy. Just to hire the smartest, bring the smartest in the world to excellent universities and then have them stay. Brilliant. So this policy is clearly one of the winners. Liquid and transparent markets. You can sell your company in an IPO, right? Relatively easily. And then there's a set of, I don't need to talk about these, capital gains taxes, favorable stock options. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that I talk about mostly to policymakers. So at the state level, let's think about California as a state. Those were national level policies. California as a state has I'm being a little arrogant here, so please take an apology. I'm a chauvinistic Californian, so please, my apologies. But we think we have one of the best public university systems in the world. And the academic rankings suggest that that's true, but you can agree or disagree. It's okay with me. An inability in Western Europe, this is pretty important, an inability to enforce non-compete agreements. So in most of Western Europe, most of the world, even most of the United States, when you get hired, you have to sign an agreement that you will not compete with your firm if you leave. In California, you can't enforce that law, that contract. So what usually does is they say, I'll give you $1 million if you leave to not compete with me. And then you get out there and you say, shit, I can build a Google here or something. Here's your $1 million back. I'm done with the contract. And you can go compete. Right? Most countries in the world and most states in the United States, you don't have this ability to enforce non-compete agreements. In China, it's hard to enforce too, but I'm talking more about Western Europe. Yeah.
Because of the bad laws, or it's simply there are no laws that actually enforce that?
So that's a great question. And it's very funny. It goes back to the gold rush. And in the gold rush, miners would come in and they would work for a boss, right? And then what they would do is they'd get enough money and get enough to a pan, and they'd say goodbye to the boss, who'll get to keep the gold, and go, I'll try myself, right? And then it went to state court, and the state court said, I couldn't steal from my boss, so I can't take IP or equipment or anything, but otherwise you're severable. You can sever yourself from your boss and go compete with him, right? You can't go compete on his land, obviously. So that's where the law came from, or that's where the court interpretations came from. And once that happened, now it's just part of the ecosystem. It's just the way it is. You can't enforce a non-compete agreement. You know that. So you know that your employee, if he's really or she's really, really good, might leave. What the hell? That's part of the business structure. That's the way it is, right? So this is really, there's been a lot of research that shows that this creates a lot more entrepreneurship. If you can just leave and start your own firm, right, rather than your boss being able to prevent you, taking you to court and suing you for competing with him or her. Okay, extremely liberal bankruptcy laws. Again, I don't know the Russian, but in Western Europe, the bankruptcy laws are very strict. It's very hard to declare bankruptcy. In the United States, and particularly in California, it's very easy to declare bankruptcy. I know people who've done it 2 or 3 times already, right? And after 3, 4, 5 years, they're able to borrow money again. In the United States, that's just the way it is. Anyway, some people think it's a nice place to live, socially liberal, relatively strong environmental regulations. Some people like California as a place to live, and that's an attractor. It's relatively warm, etc. Relatively, with exceptions, a long history of tolerance compared to other parts of the United States. I'm not arguing the U.S. is a very tolerant place. I mean, I know that that's not true. But relatively speaking, particularly the Bay Area has been quite tolerant. Okay, well, I love this tolerance, right? I don't know if you remember the old Star Trek when old Spock came down and walked around San Francisco and nobody thought he was unusual at all. And Mario lives in San Francisco. Look, you can tell they're tolerant. Sorry about that. Okay.
There was an ad for the, gay marriage.
Oh, there's an ad for gay marriage. Okay, yes. Interspecies gay marriage. Okay, so I've given you this wonderful story, and I do this for the policymakers, right? This wonderful story about how great, it is, blah, blah, blah. And I just want you to see that this is San Jose, the homeless. I mean, Silicon Valley has 2 faces, right? There's the face of wonderful success. This is, I think, Larry Ellison's place, or maybe that's a Russian billionaire. I can't remember. It's either Larry or a Russian billionaire who moved to the valley. Berezin, anyway. This is Facebook, Sean Parker, I don't know if he was a founder, but one of the early guys. He had a $12 million Lord of the Rings wedding in one of the most beautiful state parks in California. And I guess they got so drunk that they caused $3 million worth of damages. So what I'm trying to show here is the negative piece. So there's positive, certainly positive, but there are pieces that are not so nice, homeless people, etc. In an environment with that much wealth, I think it's important to keep that in mind, that this is not some kind of heaven on earth. Oh, that's Ferrari Maserati of Silicon Valley. It's I don't know, maybe you Russians have now selling more Ferraris and Maseratis than Silicon Valley. But anyway, it's one of the biggest dealerships for Ferraris and Maseratis in the world. Okay, so Silicon Valley's future, enormous amounts of capital, venture capital, angels, right? Angels are the people who can put in $1 million to a deal, right? So you've all heard about angels, okay. Great universities, only rivaled in the United States by Boston. It's more globally connected than ever, I think, for the software work that you guys are doing. It's these global connections. Today, the Valley is connected to everywhere where there's relatively large communities of technically trained, quality people. India, Shanghai, Beijing in particular, perhaps more than Shanghai, Bangalore in India, etc. So, interesting new people keep coming. Right, as long as we can get that smart Russian programmer, that smart Indian programmer to come, this region is constantly being replenished with smart new people. So that's really, really important to the region, because what it always needs is this new ideas coming from around the world. Okay, if digitization continues this trajectory, if it offers new opportunities, then this region is likely to be able to take advantage of them. And it's unlikely, at least in the medium term, for any other region to be as successful. And let me give it, even if there weren't the smartest people in the world, even if it wasn't the smartest, if it's just the average, in Silicon Valley, when a new idea comes along, the 10 startups will start along that new idea and try to get that new idea to make it a business, right? If you think about everywhere else in the world, maybe they could have one try, right? So Silicon Valley with so much money and so many people can try 10 times where most other places can try once or twice. They don't have the money, they don't have the people. Well, again, if it's just random, if I have 10 chances to succeed and you have one chance to succeed, I'm more likely to win than you, right? Sometimes somebody will win, right? I mean, Skype, right? Skype. That was a global class winner. It didn't start in Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valleys were trying, people were trying. But for Skype, which was sort of, I don't know, was it Latvia or maybe it was Sweden, I'm not exactly sure where in Europe, in the sense that there were multiple founders. That was the only big European home run. Spotify, okay. Yeah, so there's another one. MySQL was a great Finnish success, and it moved to Silicon Valley, right? So that's the other thing, is very often there'll be a home run in other parts. Facebook, that was a Boston hit. Facebook's now in Silicon Valley. So that's the other thing, is it becomes attractive. So, but there could be home runs in other places. My only point is, if I get to bet 100 times and you get to bet 3 times, you'll win sometimes, but I'm likely to win more. Simple, simple. Okay, I'll just skip over this. This is just not of interest to you. Okay. Yeah, this is of some value. Okay, so this is, of course, I present this to the Swedish Ministry of Enterprise and the Finnish Science Council. And maybe it's not as true of Russia, but let me just go through it, and some of it might be true. Some top flight scientists and universities, but relatively speaking, not as many. Difficult to attract and retain top talent from abroad. So I spend a lot of time in China, and I've worked with Tsinghua University and some of those. The Chinese cannot attract the smartest German programmer. He won't go there, right? They can't attract the smartest Indian programmer, right? Why would they go to China? So one of the advantages right now is that we get to attract from everywhere, and most other places can't attract. So if you're the smartest Italian programmer this year or engineer, and someone from Russia tries to attract you, someone from China tries to attract you, and someone from the Bay Area tries to attract you, your tendency is to go to Russia. Let's say, okay, China, Bangalore, and Beijing. But this is an issue, right? So far, Silicon Valley has managed to do that. And then just legal system changes. What should they be thinking about? Okay, let's see. Let's see. So this is sort of the Spotify, the Skype. If you have the deals, the money will come. And right now, U.S. venture capital is massively investing in China. Baidu, Sina, Sohu, all the leaders were actually funded by U.S. venture capitalists. Israel, of course, has attracted a lot of venture capital from the U.S. So the U.S. guys are investing everywhere. And if you have the great deals, the money will come wherever you are. So you develop a great company, the money will come. Now, when the money comes, very often they'll try to say, well, you know, why should you stay here? Why don't you move to the United States, to Silicon Valley? Move and be close to us. And then, of course, these are other issues, but how to encourage. This isn't necessarily socially beneficial entrepreneurship. Can you create socially beneficial entrepreneurship? And then, of course, for me, the goal is always, can you encourage people to actualize their creativity? I mean, that's sort of the goal. And with that, sort of I'll end, and if we want to have a discussion, it's fine, or whatever.